Hollywood, an industry filled with animated people and lavish lifestyles, was born and raised from the murk. Scandals made their ways into the papers, actors and actresses lost their jobs, some even their lives, and the film industry was filled with shame. Morally depraved, the newspapers shouted. Tensions between the public and Hollywood grew, escalating as more scandals got uncovered. The famous silent film comedian Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle was accused of raping and killing model and rising actress Virginia Rapp. After learning this, people blew gaskets, both people in the industry and the general public. Hollywood was analogous to the devil's house, and the industry was beginning to crumble. Then came William H. Hayes, former chairman of the Republican National Committee and former U.S. Postmaster General. He took upon the burden of purifying this corrupt industry, of helping Hollywood regain their honor. So in 1922, the Motion Picture Producers and Distributors of America was founded. It aimed to self-regulate the film industry, banning and restricting the portrayal of certain topics or actions on the screen. In 1927, they implemented the don'ts and be carefuls that film studios had to follow. They banned the improper use of religious words such as God and Jesus, and any hints of nudity and sexual relationships between black and white men and women. But the film industry often failed to comply by these regulations, and due to a lack of strong enforcement, the don'ts and be carefuls became less like restrictions and more like suggestions. Then came the Production Code, popularly known as the Hays Codes. Implemented in February 1930, the code was a slightly less restrictive version of the don'ts and be carefuls, but more enforced one, aiming to be more accepted by the studio heads. Studios still didn't heed the guidelines of the code entirely, though, in the beginning of its life. But in 1934, when Joseph Ignatius Breen became the head of the Production Code Administration, a department of the MPPDA, the code became more enforced. No film was allowed to be played in an American theater without the PCA's stamp of approval, and any producer that fails to do so would be fined for $25,000, or around $500,000 in modern times if adjusted for inflation. The Production Code watched over the film industry for many years after Breen. But in 1945, William Hayes stepped down as the head of the MPPDA, quickly being replaced by Eric Johnston. Slight changes were made to the code under Johnston, such as the removal and addition of new restrictions. He also renamed the organization to the Motion Picture Association of America, or the MPAA. The MPAA still continued to avoid governmental regulation and influence, similar to the rhetorics of William Hayes based the formation of their self-regulating MPPDA on, with Johnston being an effective liaison between Hollywood and Washington. But they still restricted the negative portrayal of America in films, with only some exceptions being allowed to be shown in theaters. In 1963, Johnston suffered from a stroke and unfortunately died. The MPA continued to operate without a president for the next 3 years as studio executives continued to search for a replacement. In 1966, they hired Jack Valenti, a former aide to President Lyndon B. Johnson. Backlash against censorship was strong when he entered office, so as a response, Valenti replaced the Hays Codes with the MPAA film rating system. Instead of banning the production of morally ambiguous films, they now rated them from a scale between G, or general audiences where anyone can be admitted, and X, or adults only, where only those above 16 can watch. This allowed families to choose whether or not they wanted to expose themselves to certain subjects. Fast forward to modern America. Film censorship is lost in history, and the freedom to produce whatever one wants is largely exercised. But while film censorship has become a relic of the past, the media, specifically social medias, have begun to adopt the rhetorics of the early MPPDA, with sites such as Twitter and Reddit banning those with radical ideologies, individuals such as Alex Jones and Louis Farrakhan. The general public, similar to American society during the 1920s and 30s, views certain ideologies and people as immoral, fighting for their suspensions. While no encompassing organization has been formed to restrict these views, individual companies like the aforementioned Twitter and Reddit, as well as sites like Facebook and YouTube, have taken it upon themselves to ban these people. It seems like the industry will soon suffer a similar fate of regulation and censorship that Hollywood suffered from. But these social media companies are something that the film industry didn't: the mistakes of history. Rather than jumping headfirst in the rabbit hole of restrictions, companies only choose to ban the most radical of the bunch, mainly people that they think may intend to impose harm on others. But this sort of regulation can still be dangerous on the road of censorship. So recently, Reddit and some other media sites have begun to quarantine certain people and communities, instead of completely banning them. This allows people that do want to discuss with these communities to do so in a contained environment, without angering those in those communities. This echoes the film rating system that the MPAA implemented, where people can choose whether or not they want to be exposed to certain subjects without it being on the front pages of the sites. It is this quarantine system that will prove to be the most successful model for social media sites to regulate what people see. The film industry has been using the MPAA rating system for years without much backlash. The only criticism it does receive is only for the smaller details, and those can be changed without major reform. Social media sites are on a path to success. And instead of going through the process Hollywood went through for decades, social media sites have condensed it down to a handful of months, all due to the growing caution in the entertainment industry concerning censorship. They are learning from the past, with their new discoveries building upon each other, evolving the industry in a way that benefits both us in the present and us in the future.